I wonder whether in a few weeks, months' time, the very existence of Nord Stream 2 will be something that will disappear in a memory hole. Because the way this whole affair about the sabotage of Nord Stream 2 is being handled by European governments and by the European media is astonishing. This is a sabotage attack on a major European infrastructure project. It's a direct attack on Europe's energy pipelines. The pipelines were the key to securing Europe's energy future. At least that's what we were being told only a few months ago. And yet, barely any coverage of these attacks in the media, very little speculation, no actual pointing of fingers, no actual statement about who was responsible. And governments are saying as little about them about this whole incident as possible. As you said, the Swedes are pulling out. They're not going to involve themselves in the investigation. It's too sensitive. We can't really talk about this. And now we've had perhaps the most extraordinary comments of all, which are from the German government. Now, a German minister, direct question was asked about, the investigation, who was responsible. And the German government, this minister has said that Germany knows who carried out this attack, but it's not going to disclose it because doing so would be contrary to national security. So, first of all, how do they know, given that so far as we're aware, no proper investigation has been carried out? Is it that they actually know, or are they guessing? Or perhaps, which is the most plausible explanation of all, as far as I can see, the person who did it, or who was aware of who has done it, has actually come along to the Germans and told them. And in light of that, given that they know who did it, we're told that they can't disclose it because that would be a national security issue. Well, I think we can say confidently that in that case, it can't have been the Russians, because, of course, if it was the Russians, there would be no reason, no national security ground that I can see that would explain why the Germans would not disclose that fact. In fact, I can absolutely guarantee to you that if it was the Russians, the Germans would be out telling everybody that it was. We would be having European security summits. There would be NATO meetings. There would be EU meetings, all those sort of things. The reason that it's not being disclosed is because the Germans now know for a fact that it was not the Russians. It was one of their own allies. Now, that could have been Ukraine. At least Ukraine might have been involved. But I reiterate what I've been saying all along about this affair, which is that nothing like this could have been done without permission from the United States and without technical support from the United States. I think it is inconceivable that an attack of this nature could have been carried out in the Baltic Sea with a US fleet apparently there and roundabout, and the United States would not know about it and would not have been in a position to prevent it. So that's where we are. This whole situation of these pipelines that have dominated European politics for so long, it's, as I say, is vanishing into a memory hole.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. You mentioned that Germany had said that this was a national security issue. That's why they're not able to release the information as to who done it, right? This is a national security thing. So it's very safe to say that Russia is out as far as a suspect, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any doubt about that, actually. Okay. I think that idea that it was the Russians is gone.
Yeah. Okay. So my question is that this is obviously a country that's friendly to Germany or some sort of ally to Germany. What does this tell you with regards to this country that has done this? I won't name the name of this one country, or maybe it's a combination of countries. But what does that country say, or these countries say to themselves, knowing that they can do this to Germany? How does that change their viewpoint on Germany? I mean, to sit there and say, I can blow apart pipelines that are critical for the for Germany's sovereignty and for Germany's economy, and I can blow them up, and they're going to actually cover for me. Well, what else can I do? I mean, does this not embolden the country that did this even further?
Well, I think there's three points to make here. Countries that do this to pipelines, which are partly owned by Germany and which were going to Germany and which were a German project, more a German project, I will reiterate again, than a Russian one. Both Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 were first proposed by German leaders, Gerhard Schröder, and then subsequently Angela Merkel. Well, countries that do that to German projects, even German projects that are now suspended, as the Nord Stream pipelines were, they are not friends of Germany. A friend doesn't do this to you. That's not what a friend does. So they're not real friends of Germany. Secondly, these countries don't trust Germany. They clearly don't believe that the Germans left to themselves can be trusted to keep these pipelines switched off. So it tells you already this relationship between these countries, these partners, these so-called allies, whoever they are, and Germany is actually deep down a fundamentally hostile one. They don't trust Germany. They're prepared to act against Germany. And they're not ultimately friendly to Germany. They do not have German interests at heart. But the third thing it tells you, and it's the point that you've been leading the questions to, and in some ways it's the important ones, is that the German government doesn't defend German national interests and is prepared to side with these unfriendly powers, because that's what they are, these unfriendly powers that distrust Germany against German interests, that they are more aligned with powers that are unfriendly to Germany than they are with Germany itself and with the German people and German business community. And that ought to, in any functioning state, whatever its political system, call into question, I would have thought, the propriety of having a German government like that. It is owned. This German government is owned by governments, parties that are unfriendly to Germany and don't trust Germany. No self-respecting country would allow this to happen. Any self-respecting country with a proper government, they learned who had done this thing. They learned that it was their own allies and friends, or so-called allies and friends, that had done this thing, would be out complaining about it. There would be, at the very least, a massive public row. There would be political consequences. And of course, the German people would be informed. I mean, saying this is a national security issue which can't be shared means concealing the truth of this from the German people. What kind of democracy is it where things like this happen? What kind of democratic system does Germany have anymore? They don't. They have a system where their government is owned by someone else, and the world, everybody, the Russians, the Chinese, the Africans, the Latin Americans, the countries of the Middle East will see that, and they will say to themselves, Chancellor Scholz does not really lead Germany, because if he did, he would not allow something like this to happen. We see how the Saudis, they stood up to the United States over oil production cuts. They've gone ahead and done it. They've exercised their own decisions. They made their own decisions. They've come under a lot of criticism from doing it, but they've stuck by those decisions. They've shown that they are a real force. Now the Saudis, for example, the people in Qatar, the Emir of Qatar, there were going to be all those deals with Qatar. They know that the country that they're dealing with, the government that they're dealing with in Germany, isn't a real government of Germany. It is owned, lock, stock, and barrel by someone else.
Okay, what about Sweden?
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. They're doing exactly
the same thing. But they came up with a
thing.
different statement. Yeah. They have a different narrative. Theirs is this is sensitive information. So Germany is this is a national security issue. Sweden is this is sensitive stuff. So we can't talk about it.
But
they have a new government
it.
too. How come the new government that's going to enter into power? They've actually formed a coalition, Alexander, the new government in Sweden. Shouldn't they come into power and say, you know what? No, we're not going to hide this. We want to be straight with the people of Sweden. We want to be transparent. This is what happened.
Well, all I can say is once upon a time, I can remember a Sweden which would not have said these things. I can remember the Sweden just of Prime Minister Tage Erlander of the 1960s, of Olaf Palme, his political heir. They would not have sat by and let themselves be treated in this way. And of course, they would have taken the Swedish people into their confidence. They would have openly discussed this. Sweden is a very democratic society in its own quirky and ultra-conformist way once upon a time. There would have been a big discussion and debate about this in Sweden. They wouldn't just conceal it, because actually, if you think about this, what the Swedes are saying is no different from what the Germans are saying. The Germans are saying, "Oh, we're not going to tell you who these people are who did this thing because it's a national security issue. It's too sensitive." The Swedes are saying, "Well, we're not even going to look at this because it's so sensitive," which of course tells you that one, they know who did it. Of course they do. And secondly, they're afraid to discuss this with their own people. And of course, they don't want that. They're frightened that if they say this and they go and say this publicly, well, it will wreck relationships, which the Swedish political class, the Swedish government nowadays is not only anxious to preserve, it is so anxious to preserve that it is prepared to sacrifice basic issues of Swedish sovereignty and Swedish democracy in order not to rock the boat with whoever it is who's done this thing. And you're quite right. New government being formed, you'd have thought the new government with the Swedish Democrats involved, supposedly sovereigntists, you'd have thought that they'd make a stand about this. It seems they're not going to. And again, that begs questions about the nature of Swedish politics, just as it does about German politics. It looks to me, again, as if the Swedish political class, like the German, is owned lock, stock and barrel by a third party, whichever that is. And can I just say, this isn't a simple business. I mean, what must have happened is that people must have been warned. If you rock the boat about this, if you start making difficult questions, if you start giving the wrong answers, then there will be trouble for you. Not just trouble for your country, but trouble specifically for you. Because that's the only way that these sort of things are done.
Yeah, well, Sweden inked a security deal with the U.S. just the other day as well.
Absolutely.
Interesting timing there. Well, while Sweden waits to get into NATO, the U.S. is going to provide the protection. It sounds so mafia-like, doesn't it? They're going to provide the protect.
It is completely mafia-like. I mean, a massive act of sabotage is carried out off the Swedish coast. It's too sensitive to even look into. We can't talk about who might have done this, so we're going to look for protection to Al Capone. Oh no, sorry, I meant to the United States.
It is incredible. Just a final thought before we wrap up this video. We've been saying for a while now on this channel, and I've always thought that the U.S. Plan B or Plan C with regards to everything that's happening, not only in Ukraine, but this shift in the world order that's underway. I've always thought that the backup plan for the U.S. is if we lose Russia, some of China, some of India, some of the rest of the world, let's call it, so be it. At least we're going to completely control the collective West. I mean, completely, from top to bottom, left to right, a fully subordinate group of nations.
that
We
is
can, we
exactly.
can
I
live
mean,
with that.
yeah,
Fine, that'll be a good consolation prize. I think we're seeing that
yeah,
unfold in real time.
yeah, absolutely. And of course, but the important thing is, it comes with an important difference from what used to exist before. I mean, during the Cold War, the United States was allied to the European states. And of course, at that time, the European states exercised an enormous amount of political space. They had a lot of sovereignty. There was political discussions. There was, as I said, Margaret Thatcher, I can remember quarreling with Ronald Reagan, a great friend, over, the Grenada invasion, over the gas pipeline from the Soviet Union to Germany. She supported the Germans. She supported the building of that pipeline. People tend to forget all of that. I remember her saying, contracts are sacred. You can't interfere with contracts. Once upon a time, that was the relationship. It was a relationship between allies. And of course, the United States was prepared, not only prepared, worked to ensure that economic conditions in Europe were good and that living standards in Europe were higher, much higher than they were in the territory controlled by the adversary, by the Soviet Union. Now, what we're seeing is that political space in Europe is disappearing, and the economic interests of Europe and the living standards of the people of Europe are being sacrificed in order to ensure bloc discipline. So I completely agree with you about that. This is clearly the plan B. If you can't dominate the world, well, at least you can retain control of your core empire, if you like, your core
big fish in a little pond. Yeah,
exactly. A big fish in a smaller pond. It's not really a big pond, but a smaller pond.
Smaller.
Exactly, a smaller pond than it was. But whereas before, the United States was ultimately, the provider. It was, a generous ally today, and sooner or later, this is how it's going to be perceived in Europe and elsewhere. It's going to become a predatory one, just as the Soviet Union used to be perceived, became to be perceived in the Eastern European states that it dominated. People eventually, after a certain period of time, began to become increasingly resentful. They were saying, why are we accepting these living standards, this circumscribed political debate, compared with what was going on beyond the sphere which we have found ourselves in. But there's a problem the United States may face in the future. For the moment, I agree, it's plan B. You give up on China, you give up on Russia, even India looks a bit shaky now. Africa, Middle East, you're quarreling with the Saudis. So you entrench, you consolidate around your established sphere, the collective West, and you make sure that that is now more tightly controlled than it has ever been.